How do armies work? How do you build a good list? What do the units do? All questions to be answered on today's Army Masterclass. Legitimately, I just hope you like this video. The most common question I get asked when I'm making content or I'm live streaming is, what's a good list? What unit should I take? How should I win? All fair questions. I mean, I still want to know the answer to that myself. Age of Sigmar armies are complex to put together, from the list writing stage to understanding how they work and play on the tabletop. Sometimes a list does so well it becomes pretty popular, it gets discussed on YouTube videos, or it gets discussed in forums or on social media posts, and you kind of don't know why or how they work. That's what this series of videos, all these videos, most of my videos, some of my videos, that's what these videos are aiming to solve. Welcome to the Army Masterclass. Hi, I'm Rob from The Honest Wargamer, and today's and our very first Army Masterclass is about the Lumineth Realmlords one-drop shooting list. And I've got an expert in to help me with parts of the Army Masterclass.
I like armies which let me do woo fun things. And in Lumineth, almost every unit can let you do fun things.
Each time I do one of these masterclasses, there'll be an accompanying interview with the player who plays this list really well at tournaments, and hopefully, eventually, game footage as well. Before we look at the list, we're going to have to look at how we talk about lists and units in them. This is actually a really big challenge because everyone does it differently, and I'm not sure if anyone's necessarily tried to put it into a very simple to understand system. So this is my attempt to codify it. Codify. How do you say codify? So this is my attempt to codify it into a system that we can all understand and use. I'm going to talk about army archetypes and unit roles, and I might genuinely add some more to this or take some away as time goes on and the game evolves, or my understanding of how the game works evolves. Also, if you've got any ideas and resources and things that you want to talk about with me on this subject, just drop them in the comments. I'm always really interested to learn and read these things. I'll also definitely make a detailed video about army archetypes and unit roles soon. Army lists normally have an overall strategy or theme to them, and we call this an army archetype. So at a simple glance, you can understand how an army is trying to win the game and what its strengths and weaknesses are. This doesn't mean it always plays that way, but it's its main win condition. Examples of army archetypes are Alpha Strike, Beta Strike, Pin, Castle, Damage Dealer, Damage Check, and a debuff. Unit roles are, unsurprisingly, the role a unit takes in an army. And of course, a unit doesn't have to stay inside of that role. It can change up mid-game. Your best damage dealing unit could become a screening unit if it's going to get you the victory points you need to win the game. The different roles are support, damage dealer, anvil, screen, points grabber, and assassin. I'm sure we'll add more or clarify more of these in the future. Okay, let's start simple. Let's look at the list and look at a quick unit overview. The Scinari Cathallar is a support caster and Galician champion, armed with a unique enhancement that makes this model count as 10 on an objective, and the artifact the Silver 1. The general is a Lord Regent and a camel-riding support caster, and if you kill him, Lumineth players really get the hump. Worth it. That was worth it to put that joke in. We've got Teclis, the actual god of magic, and being a failure to his children. He fulfills the support and damage dealer roles by being a great magician and is also a monster, so there is some combat and ranged output, and 2 lots of 20 Sentinels in the ranged damage role. We have a unit of 10 Wardens in the screen and melee damage dealing role, 5 Windchargers in the screen and ranged damage dealing role. There are 2 endless spells. The Rune of Petrification is used for damage dealing, and the Umbral Spellportal is a utility piece for extending spell ranges. This Lumineth list is a castle archetype. It's a ranged damage-dealing army with support pieces, which significantly increase both the survivability and the output of the army. This list has got 3 major damage dealers in Teclis and the 2 units of 20 Sentinels. Sentinels shoot 30 inches with 1 shot each, unless you get within 6 inches, in which case you get an additional shot thanks to being the sub-faction Helon. They do mortal wounds on 6s to hit, unless they cast their spell, in which case they do mortal wounds on 5s. Also, amazingly, if you charge them, they get to use the generic command ability Unleash Hell. This means that they're going to get to shoot into the oncoming enemy as they charge in. The best case scenario for using Sentinels is that an enemy actually charges the screen in front of the Sentinels, and then the Sentinels unleash hell into them without ever having to worry about being hit in combat. Okay, I don't want to be all English about it, but we need to talk about Agincourt. I know. What? Where are we? The Battle of Agincourt took place in France on October the 25th, 1415. And this is where the English taught the world that bow power is stronger than horsepower. I think that's the lesson they learned. My point, if I had one, is that range damage output is almost always better than melee damage output. Let's look at why. When you do damage to the enemy with any sort of ranged attacks, your opponent just can't hit you back with their ranged attacks. Doesn't work that way in Age of Sigmar. That means that you don't ever have to worry about receiving damage back into your unit, keeping that unit at maximum efficiency while depriving the enemy's unit of its efficiency. Melee units just don't have that same luxury. They must charge in, they must engage in the enemy, and if they don't wipe out the enemy, then they can get hit back. Even if they do wipe out the enemy, there might be another similar unit nearby for the enemy engaged, and they might be able to attack back. So melee units almost always lose efficiency when they're doing their damage. Sure, melee units tend to do a lot of damage when they get in there, but some range units do so much damage at that range that it's just as good, and if not better. Range units have a better effective range. Movement plus the range of the weapon's attack is going to equal the effective range. When you get to the tabletop and you start asking questions of your opponent, we ask a lot about the effective range. Hey, how far does that shoot? 24 inches. Cool. How far does it move? 5 inches. So the effective range of that unit is 29 inches. Those are questions that you always need to ask a lot when you're playing a game because they give you more data. So let's just say that you have a unit that moves 12 inches. That means that it moves 12 and it has the opportunity to charge 2d6. This means it has an effective threat range of 24 inches. However, it's very unlikely that you're going to roll 2 6s on a 2d6 charge. Even with the command ability to be able to re-roll that, I think you have about a 5% chance of being able to roll that 12. And so even a unit that moves 12 inches, which is quite fast in Age of Sigmar, means that your effective range is more likely around 19 inches because a 7-inch charge with a reroll is more likely to happen than not likely to happen. So that's roughly about its effective range. However, missile units are different. They move 5, 10, 15 inches, doesn't matter, but let's just say it moves 5 inches and its weapons range is 18 inches. That means it's a guaranteed 23 inches. There's no ifs or buts about your ability to apply damage at that range. It just does that because the move plus the weapons range never really changes. This means your ability to project power or apply damage at range is increased dramatically, and that utility is incredibly useful in the game. So missile units generally are just better. However, there are some weaknesses to them. Obviously, if you get them, they normally die pretty quick. And there aren't too many missile units that have outrageous output. This list also does range damage via spells. Quite a few armies have the ability to do this, but Teclis does it incredibly well with his War Scroll spell, Searing White Light. I'm going to let Matt explain this because genuinely he just looks so happy to be using this.
So for anyone who doesn't know, Storm of Searing White Light is an holier than 18 spell. Anyone, sorry, not holier than 18, any enemy units within 18, on a 2-up, they take D3 mortal wounds. On a 5 to 6, they take D6. And obviously, the big, trick that everyone's sort of familiar with now is you put that through the spell portal. So you get a big old 36-inch range, maybe more if you cast it from another wizard in front of Teclis. And then you just put that through the spell portal, do a load of mortal wounds to their army, and it's a great time. You love a knife. And sometimes it spikes, and you might just block a support hero, or you might just kill a load of dudes that you weren't expecting, the opponent was expecting to die. Yeah, it's pretty good.
As said before, these range units work really well inside a list archetype called the castle. Castles are exactly what you think of them. A strong front wall made of screens and then the damage coming from behind them. I'm not sure they're like castles. They might be more like tanks, like armor plate and then the gun, but it's too late now. It's a castle. Strengths of this build are that it defends the strong pieces, and if you can't breach the castle, they normally win the game. Weaknesses of castle archetypes are that they tend to be very static, so they struggle to hold objectives outside their deployment, and if the castle wall falls, they normally lose. Castle archetypes want to protect high-value units for the first few turns, and then unpack into the midboard and win the game. Teclis, the Lord Regent, and the Cathallar all act in the support role for this army. Teclis as a unit brings about as much utility to an army as any other unit in Age of Sigmar. He knows 14 spells, including a teleport and a double move spell, can cast a ward save aura and has an innate spell ignore aura, can shut units down with the crippling vertigo spell, does massive area of effect damage, and is a monster. The Lord Regent has a war scroll spell that makes 3 Vanari units do mortal wounds on 5s instead of 6s. This frees up those units who are all wizards to cast more of the awesome spells from the lore, and is a backup to make sure the 2 Sentinel units do maximum damage each turn. The Scinari Cathallar can stop an enemy unit from moving, shooting, and fighting. It's a Galician champion, and, thanks to the unique enhancement, counts as 10 on an objective. Teclis is a massive points investment, and you need to invest lots of energy to make sure you get the most out of Teclis, but when you do, the results just speak for themselves. The next 2 units fall into the damage dealing and screening roles in the army. The 10 Wardens are the screen or the castle wall for the army, but a legitimate unit on their own. 20 attacks at 3-inch reach that can do mortals on 6s or 5s with a 4+ save and are innately -1 to be hit in combat, and they're going to get a 5+ ward save from Teclis. We also can't forget about the ability to stack saves on units like this. Mystic Shield plus being able to use their Aether Quartz plus all-out defense means they can have +2 to their save, which is pretty fantastic. The Hurakan Windchargers are a fast damage dealing unit that can also act as a damage dealer and objective grabber. Units like this are great because the high movement value gives you lots of options. You can grab objectives or engage with smaller units because they're not an ultimate hammer, they're just a small damage dealing unit, but they're also cheap enough that you can use them as screens to protect all of the output coming from Teclis and the Sentinels. There are 2 endless spells in the list. Endless spells are spells that you pay points for, and they have physical models that represent them on the tabletop. This list has got the Rune of Petrification and the Umbral Spellportal. The Umbral Spellportal is a utility spell that lets you cast spells through it, which in this list will be Searing White Light, cast by Teclis. This means that he and you will be able to hit units that are 36 inches away and do up to D6 mortal wounds to them. This is insanely powerful. It's an AoE spell, so area of effect. It hits every unit within 18 inches. The spell portal is set up 18 inches away. This gives you an effective range of 36 inches. But really what it does is it allows you to do 18 inches around their whole army. It's amazing. The whole army is in the 1-drop battalion, the Battle Regiment. Battalions are very important, but more importantly, the Battle Regiment is the most important because it means that you are a 1-drop. This means that unless your opponent is also a 1-drop, in which case it goes to a roll-off, this means you get to choose who goes first. This is very useful for this list because really what it wants to do is it wants to give you the first turn. It wants you to run across the board, grab objectives, or try to charge it, and then it's going to just shoot you to pieces. This is also one of those really great lists that even if it loses the roll-off, then it can still affect you at a really massive range. So having that choice to go first is super important to this army, and therefore the Battle Regiment is what gets taken. You'll tend to find a lot of the kind of alpha, castle, and shooting lists will all try to be 1-drop lists. The Rune of Petrification is another AoE mortal wound spell that affects every unit within 6 inches and does D3 mortal wounds on a 4+ at the beginning and end of the movement phase. Between Teclis and the Rune of Petrification, as a combo, a unit up to 24 inches away can receive up to 12 mortal wounds in a turn. And then this can happen to multiple units in the turn. And that's before a single arrow is shot through the air. It's really good. Before we talk about how to use a list, I'm going to let you know that there is an interview with Mr. Matt Goldsborough. At the time of recording this, he's the 3rd best performing Lumineth player in the world. The interview is on Patreon, and you can go and check it out on the Honest Wargamer Patreon and get some early access to the insights that Matt gives. He talks about this list in detail. And if you don't want to support the show or can't support the show, the interview will still be available publicly in a couple of weeks. Also, if you like this video, I'm going to try and make more videos like this. And in fact, I'm trying to make loads of videos. I'm working really hard to try and make it so that I can get an editor. That will really speed up the process of creating videos like this, and your support in any way will help me do that, so thanks. Okay, let's talk about how to use this list in the game. And this list just reminds me of being a camper in Call of Duty. You just sit in a corner and you just shoot, man. It's just literally all you do. But using this list is easy in theory, and I guess it's tough in execution. You deploy in the corner, setting up your screens carefully, and then hoping to do as much damage as you can to the enemy hammers and utility pieces until you can unpack the army in the mid-game and take the objectives in the middle of the board. The difficult part with this list is making sure you set up the screens right, you understand where your opponent is going to move their units to, and how you're going to be able to affect them at range. Setting up those screens well is going to be super important so those damage dealers don't hit you, and therefore you're going to have to be very good at the micro. This is understanding the positioning of each single miniature so that you can get the ranges exactly right, and this is annoying to do and tedious and takes a long time, like truth be told, and is very important. You charge in and then your opponent's like, oh, I'm within 3 inches of that unit, and you're like, well, no, I didn't intend to be. So you have to make sure that every element is done right. You also have to learn the order of your spells. You have to understand the matchup. Am I going to cast a teleport spell this game? Am I going to try and teleport the spell that makes it so that you have to spend 2 CP for your command abilities? What is the most important spell I can be casting this turn, and what's going to give me the best opportunity to win? And that's just something you're going to have to practice and get better at. There's a bit of a joke in the community about how long a Lumineth magic phase takes, but that's because genuinely most of the decision points for this army are made there. It's not made at moving. Let me tell you. How to beat the list is a question I get asked a lot about every list. Hey Rob, there's a list. How do I beat the list? This one for this army is super tough. You can't really stand out of range of this army because it will do so much damage at range. Similarly, it's a real problem because of the sub-faction that when you charge in, they get even more output. I would say that the best way to try to beat it is you just need to engage it early, hit it so that it can't really get outside of its own castle while you go up on the primary points. Try to build tough, survivable units that won't necessarily get taken off early, and if you can push through to turns 2 and 3, then you might be in a really good spot. Truthfully, I'm not sure. It's one of the better lists in the game right now. However, someone recently has done it with Sylvaneth, and thankfully, one of our upcoming list masterclasses is on exactly that. In conclusion, it must feel great playing this list. You have so much output, so much raw power as a list. This army just gives you so much to do. I don't think necessarily it's overly engaging to play against because you just have to rush the castle, and you either do that and win or do that and lose, and most oftentimes you're going to lose. But I do think it's one of the best, if not the best, Age of Sigmar 3 list available right now, especially if you're going to try and play them in tournaments. I definitely wouldn't take this to a casual match. If my friend rang me and was like, hey Rob, do you want a game tomorrow? I'd be like, I'll take this list. But if I was going to an event or a tournament, this GHB, so Season 2, 2023, I would definitely try and take this list. So rating the army. It gets a 10 out of 10 at its chance to win an event. And it gets a 7 out of 10 for its difficulty to produce. Its difficulty to play is 7 out of 10. I really hope you enjoyed this video. It's the first one I've done, so that means it's feedback time. I need to know everything that you liked, didn't like, what stuff I can add into the next Army Masterclass, and all those other things. I hope you enjoyed it, and I just want to know what I can do to make better content. It's been a real challenge, this particular video, or these series of videos, or how to tackle them, because I'm always asked questions about lists and how they work and what they do. I don't think battle reports are necessarily the right way to go about it because they're super, super long. So I'm hoping this was a good way of doing it, and eventually I'd like to add in game footage and examples from games. That's just going to take me time to develop and grow over the next year, and so we'll just get there together. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks very much, and thanks for being honest, Wargamers.